Oh, wow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fabric of Culture podcast. After a brief hiatus for the Labor Day holidays, I am very excited for my next guest. She and I met while we were at Shop Talk Europe, and I'm very excited to have her on the show. And I'd love to introduce you all to Carlotta Dove, who works on the retail team at IA Interior Architects. So, what she and her team are doing is very innovative and so crucial to the overall customer experience in person. And so we have a ton to talk about. So Carlotta, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Nick. That's an excellent introduction. Thank you.
You're very
Super
welcome.
excited
So
to be here today.
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm glad. And remind us where you're calling in from.
I'm actually calling in from our beautiful London office. So I kind of strategically position myself so you guys have a bit of a view from behind me and it's not just a grey wall.
Awesome. I'm sure you guys have a bunch of great views
Yes.
given, the nature of the business. So
We're in the heart of Clerkenwell, our London studio, but we're a global company. So we've got offices, especially all around America, which is great.
wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background in university and what you studied, and what really brought you to the world of retail in this specific aspect.
That's a great question. Because my background is quite unique and niche. So, despite working in a global design and architecture firm, my background is slightly different. I'm a psychologist and a researcher. So, I did a master's in psychology, back in Germany. That's where I'm from originally. And actually, my whole youth and childhood and up to age 25, I was very much on a track of becoming a psychotherapist. So I always had that in me that I was really thinking about like human nature, what do people want? And I spent a lot of my time working and doing internships in clinical settings, working with people within that environment. And what I found really fascinating is just from an observational perspective, what kind of impact your physical environment can have on how you think, how you feel, how you behave, and, how much of a positive impact it can have as well, the physical space onto our psyche, which kind of then in a roundabout way led me to move to London, really start getting into like the real estate space in a strategic and advisory function. Um, and I've been here for almost a decade at this point. And I always kind of find myself whatever function I'm in, I always start to go into research. So it's kind of interesting that that university background has been brought back quite a lot and I basically use it every day. So that's great.
That's wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually also studied psychology in
Yes, we
in
connected over that.
university. Yeah, and one of the things that you just touched on is like how we think and feel. And one of my favorite classes, and I think I mentioned it to you before, was positive psychology.
Yes.
And at the time, this was I think 2010 or 2011. It was a very new aspect of psychology, and I think traditionally we're like practitioners in the field are always known for studying like the negative effects of what
Yeah,
society
it's
or
interesting.
placement or environments have on our own psyche. And so it's really awesome and inspiring to see more people in the field doing your kind of work, because it's like, hey, like, how can we bring a lot more joy and excitement into people's lives?
And joy is such a interesting topic. I think it's probably something that's going to come up in the conversation during the hour or however long we have together. Because I truly feel like in the societal shape that we're in, state that we're in right now, like this kind of concept of joy, having spaces that enable community is more important than ever. But I'm sure we'll come to that. I'm getting
Awesome.
ahead of
No,
myself.
no worries at all. No worries at all. So let's talk a little bit about some of the
Yes.
research and insights that you've done over the years. Obviously, would love to hear some of the things that you've done in the university setting, and then kind of how that's morphed and changed over the years, and maybe some of the things that the trends that you've seen that have changed.
That's a great question. Um, so So when I was at university, it was like super scientific. I did a lot of studies with like MRIs, like actual neuroimaging and EEGs. And it was a lot more about like cognition and language recognition, like how the brain kind of absorbs behavioral patterns. So it's super academic, but as I started transitioning into the corporate world, into real estate world, I think the biggest thing I learned is how important it is to be very scientific and consumer centric in how you do your research, but it's an absolute art form breaking those insights down into a way that are digestible, tangible, and actually applicable within the world of design. So it's been a massive, fascinating learning curve for me. And I guess I should also talk a bit about my title and what I do, which is related to this. So I now work as a director of consumer experience at IA Interior Architects within our retail practice, so within IA Retail. And I head up HumanX by IA Retail, which is our dedicated research lab of sorts. And if I had to talk about our mission in a few words, it's really kind of what I said before, this idea that we believe that our environment, the environment and the physical retail environment impacts consumers. And it's super important for retail brands to deeply understand what current and future consumer behavioral needs are in order to future-proof. So I do research across categories, be it food and beverage, health and wellness, actual retail department space. And in preparation for this podcast, you kind of sometimes have to take a look back and think about what are like the key themes that we're seeing come out of the research. And it obviously it's very vast, but things that kind of stand out to me is that I sometimes feel when you talk to leadership or to people who aren't really in the field, or even retail brands in general, there's always very much a focus on what's next, how can we innovate, what's cutting edge. And I actually love sometimes juxtapositioning that with this is what consumers are actually needing right now. And a great example would be the food and bev space. I did a large scale study with, I think it was like 700 US consumers last year. And I kind of broke it down by generation and by location. So like urban, suburban and rural areas to understand how are people different? What do they have in common in terms of what they want for the future of food spaces? And
Mhm.
like 3 key themes came out, which I think might not be as revolutionary as we want them to be, but something it's important to think about them, which is this idea of humanization. So a lot of the comments kind of centered around, if I kind of invest this money and I go to a restaurant, I don't really want to faff around with QR codes. I mean, it depends on the setting, but especially in, non-fast food environments, but even some of those, people are really looking towards having that kind of human interaction with the people that are working there. And it was really interesting because in an urban environment, people are craving that even more, which kind of goes back into
Mm.
this idea that people are feeling more and more lonely. So and that's something that's kind of such a basic universal human truth, but I sometimes feel like we forget about it. And then another finding was that, people are really, especially in the restaurant setting, so like, actual just food and bev, people are really looking towards having greater privacy. When they go out, they want to connect with existing connections as opposed to, for example, being sat at a large table and kind of have to enact with the larger environment and community, which is, I think, kind of deviates to some of the other conversations I've been hearing. So I just love kind of level setting what's been going on and what people are innovating on with what consumers are asking for. And that's just an example.
Absolutely. And I also think it's really interesting because, I think some of those insights that you talk about on the surface level, it's like, oh, yeah, like that makes total sense. But I think
Yes.
sometimes it takes like to actually sit down and do the research, talk to people who are coming in and out of these places to really understand like the motivations behind it. And I think that's why, one of the many reasons why the work that you guys are doing is so important is because it's like, hey, like, some of these insights were kind of right in front of us, but we wouldn't have thought about it in certain contexts.
Yeah, and one of the things, so again, this kind of goes into the so what, which is something I've had to learn over the past decade is what does one do with those insights? You're like in a meeting, you're talking to a client or prospective client, and it's a super valid question because you're talking with people working in a brand environment or within a real estate environment, and they want to know what's the actionable part of this. So every research output that we do, every conversation we have, we always have actual design implications. So we kind of take those like truths that we identified and break them down. And then with my design team that I have on the research with the HumanX research lab, we kind of start to do like design sprints and conceptual ideation of how could this be applied in, for example, the food and beverage report in a fine dining environment, fast casual environments, and how can we kind of have these themes be consistent but in different kind of design spaces, which is interesting.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So let's drill down a little bit and talk about retail.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, I guess like what are some of the big things in retail specifically? When we talk about apparel, whether that be something that's more accessible all the way up through the luxury space. What are some of the really interesting things that you've been seeing across the board in terms of how companies are getting it right, how companies are needing to adjust to adapt in this dynamic environment, and honestly, maybe some of the companies that you think are doing really well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think obviously retail is such a broad, fascinating sector. I love working within retail because it's so fast moving. It's very exploratory. But for me and also with my background, I think the things I'm really looking out for and I'm seeing change more and more is obviously the role of the physical space. So, a lot of the events we go to, and we met at Shop Talk, Barcelona, which was a lot of the events I go to are heavily like omni-channel, digital focus. And obviously this is going to become even more and more prevalent as, AI increases, social media use increases over the globe. We are kind of having that paradigm shift go even further towards the digital side of things. And with that, there's a fascinating kind of reckoning or reassessment of the role of the physical space and what it needs to
Hmm.
do. And obviously it depends on the type of retail we're talking about and the type of brand. It's very individual, but I almost see it as a spectrum that, I think for certain brands, the physical space will become the kind of cornerstone of actually being able to, in a humane way, engage with current and new customers and kind of showcase their brand story, what they're all about. And it might not be on this very edge of the scale. It might not be about the transaction that happens within that actual store. So it's almost kind of like taking the flagship model, but, commercializing, commodifying it into the store environment, that transactions might not matter as much within the actual physical store. And it's more about long-term ROI and then translating those transactions into into the digital sales. I think that's like one of the more extreme developments. Um, but then I also really see within physical stores that they just need to work and brands need to work a lot harder to really incite and kind of innovate and excite people when they're in there. And I think some brands that I'm seeing that are doing that really well are kind of brands that use community-centric engagement, like hospitality feel and storytelling. And I love, for example, the new Printemps New York City activation because it's such a
Hmm.
beautiful way of translating kind of Parisian French storytelling into that kind of urban New York environment. There's plenty of hospitality adjacent space, like bar areas and restaurant spaces, and it's like a full-on experience, which I find amazing. I think Starbucks Reserve has done a really great job of kind of inviting customers to understand more about coffee and kind of go into that artisanal side of things from a food and beverage perspective, which I find really interesting. And then places like Petco, which obviously growing massively, that's kind of gone from, again, this kind of pure transaction space, for your dog, for your pet, into this one-stop shop destination for this is how you can become a better pet owner. We encourage you to bring your dog with us. We're encouraging you to meet other dog owners. And I think that's one of their key recipes for success as well. So I think what you're probably starting to notice is that I'm talking less about actual design activations and more about the purpose behind the stores that get me excited as well.
Got it.
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. And it's interesting because the intersection of retail and hospitality is something that I'm personally like really excited about. because I've experienced it so many times, going to different stores, and there's so many places that get it right. Like I think about, like, I'm a big streetwear fan, and I'm like, one of my favorite brands is Kith, and I think
Yeah.
Kith Treats is so great because they also add in like a cultural element. So like during certain times of the year, like during the Chinese New Year, like they were doing a lot of like Chinese inspired treats and baked goods. In certain regions around the world, they'll do ube flavored drinks, and so I think there's like something really special when you're not just saying like, hey, like let's plug a cafe or a restaurant into the store, but how can we make this a much more immersive experience and have the entire thing connected versus disjointed.
And you can really tell the difference of, just kind of the mindset of let's just put cafe in because everyone else is doing it, or let's put something in that actually matters to our customers. Like, I think activations like, multifunctional activated spaces where you can host yoga sessions or meditation sessions work when the brand understands their customer, understands this is something they're interested in. Otherwise, it will fall flat. And I think a great example of a space that truly is activated and is staying fresh for a long time would be the Puma NYC store that I was lucky enough to tour when I was in New York a few weeks ago. And, I got a tour of the multiple story kind of concept. And I was just kind of struck by just how many activations are happening on a truly like rotating, continuous basis, and how that really just enables Puma to be continuously, on the cutting edge of what's going on within New York and within that area. And it is so culturally relevant. And in order for that to happen, you do have to have dedicated strategies and a team and people. And that's something I talk about a lot with brands when we're kind of saying, you could do this and that, but obviously there's the operational aspect of it that needs to be fulfilled in order for it to truly work as well.
Oh, of course, of course. Also want to switch gears
Yes.
and talk a little bit about the potentially like the laggards and who's really leading the charge from a geography perspective.
Mm,
So, I think I have a bias because, I went to so many stores the few times I've been to Japan and seen like, wow, like these are some of the most immersive experiences that I've ever seen around the world, right? But then I've also noticed that it's like, oh, well, Tommy Hilfiger in another country looks very different than Tommy Hilfiger in the US. So do you notice that there's some areas around the world that, regardless of what brand, they're just
mm.
doing really well? Or do you find that it's brands who are taking like dramatic leaps and taking risks to say like, hey, like we want to try something new? Maybe in the Middle East, obviously all the things that Abu Dhabi is doing and Dubai around attracting more retailers that want to have more of that cultural influence and cachet.
I think it's such an interesting question, obviously, because geographies aren't in isolation. We're constantly taking inspiration from each other. But I still believe, and also looking at my work and working with brands across, past years, past decade, America very much, I feel like, is at the forefront of that kind of blend of retail, hospitality, like the kind of larger conceptual outputs and environments, like also in terms of mixed use. I feel like it's a cliche, but this kind of idea of like, really the big investment into a brand and how it shows up and the rollout perspective, I think is something that is really big within America, and obviously an environment that the rest of the world often looks towards when it comes to innovation, which I think probably as you're based in America can sometimes maybe not feel as much as that way, but it's
It
as a
does
European
sometimes.
perspective, it's
Mm.
definitely a thing. And then within, EMEA, obviously within Europe specifically, I think that's obviously when it comes to luxury apparel and fashion, that's, the heritage, the, home countries, a lot of the beloved kind of fashion brands. And you can really start to see that shift towards like almost quality over quantity and a lot more storytelling, a lot more kind of fine art within the stores. I think Louis Vuitton opened a store in Paris that kind of, when you look at the pictures, it's like almost like like a Art Deco apartment. And it really speaks to this idea that things might take a bit longer and are extremely well thought out, maybe on a smaller scale. Um, and the quality is extremely high, and the brand storytelling as well, and kind of there's a lot of protectiveness around keeping that as well, which I find interesting. And then obviously Middle East, massive investment, obviously very, very big ideas, which is a super fascinating market to be in. And then
Hmm.
um, I think in terms of APAC, I think this kind of idea of being really tech fluent and leading the way in meeting customers within kind of the AI landscape, within the digital landscape, is something that area and environment really excels in. But um, I almost feel like every geography is kind of innovating in their own way as well.
Right.
It's kind of hard to talk in and there's always exceptions to the rule as well. But I'd say we're all kind of looking at each other as we're developing ideas, which is
Trying
fun.
to see best practices
Yeah,
and stuff. No, that totally makes sense. And
exactly.
I think sometimes and like I think you hit the nail on the head when you said like, oh yeah, like, because you're experiencing all the time, sometimes you might not, be seeing the leaps and bounds that it's taking because again, like you're
Yes.
seeing the transformation happen kind of bit by bit. I think, I when the first time I went to Harrods, which was earlier this
Mm,
year, I think
in London?
uh yeah, so I
That's
was
so
in
cool.
London right before Shop Talk,
Ah, okay.
and, like, I my jaw dropped the entire time I was in there because I had never seen something. I had heard about Harrods and what Michael Ward has been doing and all the amazing things, and shopping experiences that they've brought to customers in Europe, over the past several decades, but, to be in a place where an entire floor was just dedicated to fragrances, whereas, like, I think about some of the Nordstroms here in the
Yes.
States where it's like it's the fragrance counter, but then, menswear and shoes are all probably on the same floor versus like, oh no, like we will take up an entire
It's a
floor for
statement.
fragrance and skincare. And then there's an entire floor for just menswear, right? So
And you
I
almost
think
feel
that
like a kid in a candy store, right? You're like,
it's exactly
doesn't it
right.
give you that feeling of like awe and wow? And I genuinely feel like it's that for me, Harrods, and it's really a destination in its own right. Like people go to London to shop there, which
Hmm.
is a statement in itself and super aspirational. And I think what Harrods does really well is continuously innovate on, also their physical design, the experiences that they want to give people, and really managing. They have such a rich history. They've been there for such a long time, but then also being able to still stay relevant. Must be like an interesting kind of line to walk. But yeah, the amount of people that kind of have that even on their like just holiday tourist itinerary, like Buckingham Palace, Harrods, it just goes to show what impact brands can have on our day-to-day life as well, which I think sometimes people kind of forget. So,
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. And it also might just be I'm a quote unquote victim of so like a new experience where it's just like, oh, because if you look at department stores and how they've evolved, and like department stores specifically within malls,
yes.
right? Like
Yeah.
I think there are like several Westfield malls across the US where it's like I think the one in Century City is a great comparison, right? Like if you compare that one to several other Westfields, it's night and day different, right? Like the outdoor concept in San Antonio, as when I was growing up, there was an area called La Cantera that had a mall. And that was a really new concept to us because that was an outdoor mall kind of before Westfield came around, or at least
And
before I experienced it.
was it very popular or how, you went
It
there a
was
lot?
I remember so I they opened it in 3 phases and it's a massive retail space now. And I remember when the first phase opened up, like all the stores that everybody was going to and then a few new ones that, maybe that market hadn't experienced before. I mean, when I tell you it was like you couldn't even park because so
Wow,
many
that's
people were
cool.
flocking to see like, oh, like this is such a cool mall. Because again, at the time San Antonio, I mean, it's one of the largest cities in
Yeah.
America. I think it's within the top 10. I think it's closer to like 7 or 8. But, that was something that we hadn't had before. And so, to bring something like that that was so special that was something that everybody wanted to experience. And, as they built it out, then it was like the mall and the food courts and the this and that. So,
So
I
much
always think
options. Yeah.
that. Exactly. So I think, even if you do something, different in New York or LA or somewhere in Texas, if you're doing something that might exist elsewhere but is brand new to one specific market, I think people get really, really excited because it's like, oh, I've seen this elsewhere. I haven't really experienced anything like this yet.
I love talking about mixed use redevelopment. I think especially in America, it's just such a hot topic. I don't know how you see it, but I hear obviously it gets brought up in conversations a lot, and it is my firm belief that there's just like such a lack of third spaces. And there's a bit of an erosion of third spaces across the globe. But I feel like in the US specifically, when, I kind of do my studies and I talk to people, look at survey results, this, kind of ability or to be invited to connect with your community, to go to a space and to be able to rest and enjoy the space without immediately having to consume or purchase, and having that within an actual mixed use environment, I think is really beautiful and something that will encourage people to come back time and time again because they feel invited within the space. Which then has long-term impact, in my opinion, as well on, return on investment and visiting the actual brands and retail spaces within the environment. So, but this, again, it's kind of this thing that in my opinion, you have to kind of go back to the consumer psyche and what they're missing in order to then strategically plan ahead for those kind of areas as well in a way that makes sense. Like the example you brought, I'm pretty sure there were a few masterminds behind that thinking about what, how can we serve that market? And there's once
Hmm.
you kind of draw back the curtain within that retail strategy, you'll see there's so many conversations that I had about that, and I find those the most fascinating, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
I want to also talk about something that you had brought up earlier around technology, right?
Mm.
And so I think the smartest retailers, I think China specifically, right? Like how can we integrate things like Alipay or, if there were, and I'm sure, I don't know who is doing this, but I'm sure, it's like, hey, like how can we get on WeChat and be able to service our customers either when they're on the way or in the store or after they leave, right? So, how has technology and including AI played a role in this current evolution that we're in when we talk about these physical spaces?
It's a hot button topic. I feel like we're always hearing and talking about AI. Um, I My answer will probably be less about operational efficiency or even omni-channel efficiency. I think there's a lot of conversations that need to be had and are being had about that. But the EGD team over here, IA Interior Architects, we recently actually released our research, which is more speculative and aspirational about future integration of AI into physical environments and, in my case, retail environments. And it basically, for me, boils down to this idea that AI could, in the future, with the right data privacy and everything, and I think we're
Of
getting
course.
there,
Hmm.
has a really interesting, or could play a really interesting role in kind of innovating on the actual consumer wayfinding and experience within the store. So I'm not talking about operational efficiency, which will happen and is already kind of really being focused on, but more this
Hmm.
idea of like, what if we could take the concept of wearables and, kind of AI glasses or maybe even AI earplugs or earphones in the future and have them kind of guide how we walk around a store? Or what if there could be technology that gets invented or that's being the process of being invented where you kind of opt into, I'm interested in meeting new people, you have the same interest level in X, Y, or Z while I'm in the store, and you have a haptic or wearable and it kind of pings and connects you to someone that you haven't met before. Like those kind of ideas I find super fascinating, and they could go, they could go kind of into a more exploratory, like innovative flagship style environment where AI actually gets used and tech wearables gets used to make the experience more luxurious, maybe even less tech and screens in your face and actually have it more as something that's almost invisible and hidden, but guides you throughout the environment. I hope I'm explaining that correctly. It was a bit of a mind bend for me to work with the wider team, and we've got a dedicated AI team at IA as well. But I just find it interesting because we're not fully there yet. But I think the next year, it's my belief that brands will kind of get more and more into that space of kind of filling that role of being connectors within the consumer base. Like, how can we not just create loyalty to our brand, but loyalty and friendships with between our consumers? Because that will make that
Mm.
loyalty even stronger. And I feel like that's like almost a mindset paradigm shift that's happening more and more. So how could AI play into that? I don't have all of the answers. I don't know.
No, no,
What
that's
do
a
you think? I mean, have you been thinking about that, having those kind of conversations? I'd be fascinated to know as
yeah,
well.
yeah. So with the it's a working title, the firm that I'm with
Oh,
now.
yes.
We talk about AI readiness all the time, and how companies need to have a strategy, whether it's internal or external, because we look at AI, from the customer journey overall, but number one, is this internal or external? And I think
Yeah.
we'll get to a point eventually where the answer is both.
Yes. And
But I
it's
think right
integrated.
now,
Yeah.
exactly. But I think right now, companies have to decide, do we want to focus on one or the other? And not to say that, you don't have brilliant minds at these brands that could be doing both, but something that's so new that you're trying to get your head wrapped around, like you mentioned, the data
Oh,
privacy,
yeah.
how systems are connecting, because if we're being honest, there are some legacy companies that they already have a lot of internal systems that aren't talking to each other. Adding in
Yes.
something even more complex is not going to be a huge solve for everything.
Oh, somehow my headphone disconnected for a
Oh, I think
second.
your audio
Can
cut
you
out.
still hear me?
Oh, yep, there
Okay.
you are.
I was going to say this kind of concept of big data, like it almost feels like everyone has been really great or like really diligent at collecting data for years now, but the integration aspect of it and what are we measuring? And it's honestly, that's a conversation I've been having with some brands as well of like, when we're thinking about consumer profiles or personas, what what are they made up of? Because just doing it by generation isn't really cutting it anymore. I had a
Mhm.
really interesting conversation with someone, and they were kind of saying, we integrated our data and did analysis, and what we're actually finding is that people who own a dog, and their brand had nothing to do with pet ownerships, are more likely to purchase its A, B, C products than people of the certain generation. So for me, and
Mhm.
maybe it's my background in statistics and like psychology, but I think AI and big data analysis will have a super interesting once it's been figured out. And I think people are starting to figure it out, like a really interesting impact on how products and brands are even talking to customers and in different segments, basically. Um, so yeah, without getting too nerdy, I think that's a future that's
No,
coming too.
absolutely. Yeah, no, because on that point specifically, we also talk a little bit about personalization, right?
Yes.
And so how do we use all that data that you just mentioned in a system to be able to like help brands figure out, okay, what are we doing for all these different personas? But even when you go lower than that, how can we customize an experience for one person or a family, or even like these like sub personas within our target audience? How can we create something that's so unique that it keeps bringing them back? And then the core of what we do at It's a Working Title is around content. And so when we talk about AI, like, yes, there's so many awesome companies that are, you're able to create AI images, or
Yes.
like allow that campaign process to happen infinitely quicker, purely because like you have these tools that can get you what you want much faster. But it's not it's about speed, but it's about speed the right way. And so for any of the retailers listening to this, I think customers would rather you wait an extra 6 months to get something
Oh
right the
yeah.
first time, versus bringing something to market and having to pull it back within the first few months, or the first 3 to 6 months, because you're not getting, a lot of great customer feedback, or people aren't using it. The adoption has always been an issue with technology. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure, when we talk about the customer experience, it's that digital aspect, and then it eventually will go into, the world that you guys are talking about in
Yeah.
terms of the physical.
I was going to say it, I mean, it's so interesting because I truly believe it's also interconnected. I know we always talk about omni-channel and omni-experience, and for me, it's just the word interconnected, interwoven of
Yep.
how can you meet your customer, or the people that believe in your product or your brand wherever they are. And within the world of design, we obviously have to strategize and create spaces that are adaptable and flexible. And, whenever you're having these conversations, it's, your space it isn't as adaptable and flexible as a gadget will be or technology will be. So it's really, that's where that kind of insight of where your customers now, where would they go into the future, how can design solutions react to it, really comes in. And none of us have a crystal ball, even though I feel like we all want to have one. So it really is this ability to design spaces that are purposeful for what you want to achieve now and in the future. And I believe also that are very multifunctional and that can flex, and bring in that individualization or personalization. And it's interesting, I've been doing a bit of like research into like what's ahead for 2026, 2027, and I feel like it's kind of like these core themes that we've been talking about a lot. I feel like we've been hearing personalization for so long, but it's almost like it's just getting pushed more and
Yeah,
more, and AI is going to, in that kind of democratization of data, is going to help us get there more. So I think it's an interplay.
absolutely. No, it definitely is.
Yeah.
And I also understand the flip side of personalization, right? Where
Yeah.
companies are saying, well, we can't be everything for everybody, and we don't want to come off as like we're trying to do that. So I also can kind
Yeah.
of see, that hesitation from the C-suite to say like, hey, like, if we do this, what is the kind of the worst case scenario, and how might this backfire, and talking about that risk mitigation.
I hope I'm not rambling on too much, but I'm loving this conversation. I just wanted
No,
to
you're
bring
you're
something
totally
in.
fine.
One more thing is what you're saying is so interesting because I was just listening to a creator who he's got a brilliant perspective on, societal trends, how that impacts consumer behavior as well. And he was kind of talking about how brands are shifting from this idea of everything for everyone, which I feel like has kind of really dominated 2010s to 2020s, towards this idea of kind of curated intentionality, like more of a feel of less people are in the know, which I think a lot of luxury brands have always kind of maintained and are getting into it stronger as
Mhm.
well. So it's also this idea of like brands are hopefully getting more confident in saying maybe we aren't for everyone, and maybe we need to identify with our niche, and that's how we will respond and serve our customers better as well.
Exactly, exactly. So, moving on, to the flagship concept, and I'm sure
Yes.
you all have tons of research, and I'm sure that's another area that you nerd out. It's one of the areas I nerd out in as well, for several reasons. Number one, I think it's the space where brands can say, "Hey, like, what's the most out of the box thing that we can do, or hop on a trend that we can try in one or two locations without, breaking the bank, and, like it being a huge disruptor from an operations standpoint." But even the role of a flagship in terms of, not necessarily, because obviously one of the things that brands are focused on is performance, financial performance per store. And that feels like it kind of goes out the window when we talk about flagship. It's like, hey, like this is investing in the brand narrative. Obviously, the hottest thing over the past couple months, in my opinion, was Dior bringing the spa concept to the U.S. in their flagship. So, what are your thoughts on, like what the flagship model is, and how the flagship model is serving customers today in a time where, a lot of economies around the world are starting to falter.
Yeah.
Those aspirational shoppers are kind of rethinking thinking where they want to put their money from a consumer standpoint.
That's a great point that we actually haven't even addressed yet. But even though it's completely ubiquitous, for me, the role of the flagship has changed a lot from when it kind of first emerged and there was so much excitement around it. It really did feel like more of an opportunity for brands to make a statement. A big
Hmm.
statement, show off your products, show off your brand in that kind of bold way. Maybe it's because it was like an emerging concept and that was kind of the first, not knee-jerk reaction, but kind of the first thing that people went to of like, let's just make a big statement. And I think the way the role of the flagship has evolved, it's like a lot more refined and purposeful and different between brands. I actually loved when, I don't know if you listened to the talk, but the CEO of Rituals was talking about their Mind Oasis concept.
Was just gonna
And
bring that up.
yes,
With
yeah, it's
it
so
was
funny.
amazing. It was amazing.
We're connected. In Amsterdam, and I found it such an interesting talk because he really kind of went on to say that at this point, it's not specifically, it is about the products, but the products are part of the experience. So it's just that kind of experiential quality that comes in. And it's something that you brought up as well. It's like, this is a great opportunity to test new ideas, to like meet customers or consumers where they are, to kind of test the boundaries of what they're interested in, and hopefully kind of use it as a live lab and bring some of the learnings back into our other store environments. And I think that's just one example. And it's something, like I said before, whatever goes into a flagship or into a store needs to be aligned with what your customers actually care about. Otherwise, it just feels gimmicky and not authentic, which
Hmm.
people are having such a massive aversion to. But just kind of move away from just a bold statement to something that's a lot more purposeful. And so within IA Retail, we actually have worked on, or are working on, quite a lot of different flagships across categories. So worked on like the Lucid flagship. We've been doing some for T-Mobile as well, and you can and Dyson actually as well. And I think it's kind of hard to give a unified story of what they all do because it's so different. But
Of course.
it kind of goes back to the point that each and every flagship is kind of being treated with its own purpose and mission and vision in mind. And it's like whether it be about connecting people with each other and with the brand, really digging into the storytelling of the brand, or showcasing products like it's almost like a curated museum style environment. It's way more varied than it used to be, which probably happens as a concept emerges and develops, like
Of
brands
course.
take it and make it their own.
Got it. No, that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. And then even deeper into that, moving away from
Yeah.
flagships and talking about the actual store itself. And this also might be and it depends answer, but
Sorry.
uh,
Yeah.
how are stores, whether it's brands themselves or department stores, changing their layouts and making that a lot more inviting? So is it, because I'm sure the big box retailers or the multi-brand stores are always finding the balance between like having a large space and kind of bringing in as many interesting brands as possible, but also not making it so overwhelming that consumers aren't even able to find, individually what they're looking for.
I think that's a great point. This kind of, I think there's a bit of a pushback on maximalism, even within larger department stores, that traditionally, again, had that focus on just as much product as possible. I feel like retailers and, if we're talking specific department retailers, have kind of, or have accepted that not every single product is going to be as available as it will be in the
Of
digital
course.
environment.
Mhm.
So what can we facilitate that digital cannot? And I think, again, it's that kind of that refocus on experience, like making the wayfinding super clear, making the actual store environment a lot calmer, rethinking the purpose of the store assistant. So I think with AI, a lot more tasks are operational tasks that often just completely took time and headspace of the advisor are basically starting to become, a lot less strenuous, a lot less time intensive. So focusing more on the personal interaction aspect of the store assistant, even within non-luxury spaces, which I think in terms of a layout, but it kind of translates onto cleaner floor plans. I probably don't have an answer of like if stores are getting larger or smaller, because I've been doing research on retail banking, for example, and even there,
Mhm.
there's some banks are getting larger and within their footprint, and some are getting smaller. So there's not one cohesive answer to it. Um, but I think there's a lot more focus on actually targeting the demographic that the actual store is in as well, and kind of flexing it to make it larger or smaller depending on the shopping behavior, on the need within it as well, as opposed to just going, we're a big retailer, we're just going to put in a big store. I think it's a lot more mindful of the economic realities and the cost of opening a store as well nowadays.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, Carlotta, thank you so much again for joining.
Uh,
This was such a wonderful conversation. And I know all the consumers who are listening to this, they are taking away, looking at stores in a brand new light. And for the brands and retailers, I think it's also great to sometimes zoom out and kind of say like, hey,
this is
we
what's
want
going
to
on.
do exactly. We want to do what's best for us, but at the same time, they'd be remiss if they're not looking around to see, like what are the things that we should be doing and integrating. So we very much appreciate your time and your insights.
I really love talking to you. I feel like I could be talking to you for even longer. I hope we'll see each other soon, maybe when you're over in Europe or when I'm coming over to America. So yeah,
Oh, absolutely. I'm definitely planning on making quite
great.
a few Europe trips early next year. So
Cool.
we'll definitely be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. Have a lovely day.
You're welcome. You
Bye.
too.